Standing up here on the stage, though, I am reminded of a speech I gave years ago. I was in the 11th grade. I was running for student council president, and I wrote and then tried to deliver what I thought was a masterful speech. It didn't go as planned. This continued for 30 seconds, and 60 seconds, and at 90 seconds, I walked off stage for the first time in my memory, paralyzed by fear. And over the years, fear is something that I've become intimately familiar with, much of that in the past 5 years. And it's what I've come to speak with you a little bit about today. So now that I've told you why I'm here, let me properly introduce myself. I am A.J. Edelman, Israel's Olympic skeleton athlete. And for the 99% of you who don't know what skeleton is, and the 1% who Googled it before you came into the auditorium, skeleton is a sport where an athlete of highly questionable judgment starts sprinting down an ice tunnel. He then dives headfirst onto a lunge tray. And that's where the fun begins, because he then navigates that lunge tray down a mile-long bobsled track, chin an inch from the ice, hitting speeds of over 90 miles per hour under 5 G-forces, same as a fighter pilot, steering with his head, shoulders, knees, and toes. Yes, it's a thing. And there are no brakes. If you're wondering how you win in skeleton, it's really simple. The fastest time to the bottom, still holding onto the sled, still in one piece, and still conscious, takes the gold. I'm joking, you don't actually need to be conscious. It's happened. Now, the question I'm second most often asked is, how does a nice religious Jewish boy with an MIT degree, how does he get into skeleton of all things? I assure you it's not a grudge against my parents. It began 6 years ago. I was an elite athlete from youth through university. I played hockey, and I realized in my senior year that very few kids from my background aspired to be elite athletes or to reach a level of proficiency in which I had reached. And I thought, how might I be a force for change, to shift that paradigm? I thought perhaps the best way to do so was to start a foundation one day which would get young Israeli and religious Jews the resources and coaching that I had never had when I was growing up. But the first step would be to accomplish something a little unprecedented, or at least transformational in the realm of Israeli sports. And by chance, I discovered a sport called bobsled, which is basically skeleton but seated. At the time, I thought, who wouldn't want to do that? So I Googled if Israel had a bobsled team, and I found out that they used to, from 2002 to 2006. So my excitement was building at the time. I was like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do it really well. I'm going to create that impact which I want to create. So I eagerly messaged the former members of Team Israel, and I said, hey, I would love to do this for Israel. Please sign me up. And they messaged back equally as enthusiastically. You must be this tall to ride the roller coaster. I've since discovered that bobsled coaches are not the only ones who prefer their men to be at least 6 feet tall, much to my dismay. But they did say that there's this other sport, single person, called skeleton. I was a little confused. I was like, what's with the name? Well, they were like, well, skeleton refers to where you feel the pain. But it's okay. You should just go out and try it, see if you like it. And so I did. And almost 5 years ago today, on my 23rd birthday, 2 things happened. They're very much in tandem with each other. The first is that Israel and I were given a glowing scouting report. In short, keep your day job. At the time, I was hired at an Oracle in California in a very lucrative position. And I'd love to do that thing where I stand up here on the stage and I say, ta-da, they were wrong. But they weren't. They were very much correct. See, I had scoliosis, which prevented me from balancing with the pinpoint accuracy that a skeleton athlete needs to stay straight on a sled. And if you're not straight on a skeleton sled, you quickly learn what fear actually is. But far more importantly is I couldn't sprint well. And sprinting is a critical component of skeleton. And to say that I couldn't sprint well is a drastic understatement. Have you guys ever gone to a football game, and you see those big guys, they get the ball in their hands by some miracle, and they're sprinting for dear life towards the end zone, and no matter which team you're cheering for that day, you're rooting for him to make it as far as he can before he's tackled? Skeleton terms, that was me. But the second thing that happened that day is that I decided that for the next 2,884 days, I would not rest until Israel qualified for the Olympics in a sliding sport. Representing Israel has been the greatest honor of my life, and I held that oath to be sacred. Israel didn't qualify for 2022. It qualified for 2018. Now, the question I'm asked most often, particularly by children, is, aren't you afraid? It's like, what do you think? Skeleton is an absolutely terrifying sport. But fear is a funny thing. It's not static, it's dynamic. It changes every time, and my views on fear have shifted dramatically over the years. I used to even fear fear, but now I relish it. I run towards it. I'll tell you why in just a moment. First, I want to take a step back and ask, how do we view fear? In general, as a society. It's said that many times if we want to understand how a society views anything, we just take a look at the thought leaders. And like any good millennial, I hopped on Google, and I Googled quotes on fear. I was going to do that thing where I put up a nice quote on, up here and be like, ta-da, this guy thinks this way about fear, I'm right. But no, what I found was a quote, very telling, from an oft-cited thought leader of our time. Well, he's not really of our time. He was born a long, long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. I refer to the great Master Yoda, who said that fear is the path to the dark side. And like so much of the Star Wars prequels, this is dead wrong. It's wrong in almost every conceivable way, but it does show how we as a society view fear. The current status quo is that fear is a bad thing. It's very bad. It's something always to either be avoided, ignored, or conquered. The root of the word fear that we use has roots in the German word which means danger. But what actually is fear? It's not tangible, but we do associate it with certain physiological responses. When we feel what we call fear, we activate human superpowers. Our pupils dilate, our breathing and heart rate accelerate, our sensory awareness is heightened, our palms become sweaty, we become more alert. In short, we become ready to face our challenges. Interestingly, though, recent studies have suggested that when we anticipate fear, particularly overcoming a situation in which we would feel fear, the limbic system's reward centers activate, and so we actually enjoy the situation. It's why some of us enjoy going to haunted houses or scary movies. But allow me to propose a thought experiment with two scenarios. Suppose today that I've gone a little Oprah, and each of you is getting a car, a Tesla. I've chosen Tesla for a very specific reason, because Elon Musk, if you are watching this video, then I have switched to bobsled but can't afford it anymore. And so I would appreciate if you would build Israel a Tesla bobsled. But reach out on Instagram, please. Back to our thought experiment, though. Each of you is getting a Tesla, and you all get to keep that Tesla, provided that you can sink a hole-in-one on a championship golf course by tomorrow. It's a near impossible feat for even the best of golfers in the world. And the second scenario, you get to keep your Tesla, provided you can get a ball in a hole from 3 feet away, a simple putt. In this case, your success is all but assured. But in both scenarios, you stood to lose a $70,000 self-driving amazing vehicle. Most of us, when we stand to lose something of significant value, we feel quite a bit of fear. But in the first scenario, what you likely would have felt is resignation or disbelief, not fear. While in the second, you probably would have felt excitement, which has nearly all the same physiological responses as fear. So in situations that we would call scary, if we anticipate success, we somewhat enjoy it, and fear is not present. If we know we're going to fail, we feel resigned to it, and resignation and fear also isn't truly present. So when is fear actually present? What is the necessary ingredient for a scenario in which we feel fear? I learned the answer to this in a profound life lesson a year ago at the Olympics. Skeleton is a dangerous sport. There's absolutely no getting around it. It can be brutal on the body, but perhaps the greatest risk to athletes is invisible. It's the risk posed to brain health. Skeleton athletes can suffer violent head impacts to the ice more than 15 times per day. Understanding this, I signed up years ago to donate my brain to science when I pass on. Hasn't happened yet, good. And I've focused for years on trying to understand how to help fellow athletes slide in a safer manner. In my Olympic season, there were a few devastating head injuries. I was on hand to witness one of them, and I decided that I could no longer attempt to qualify for the Olympics if I didn't first do something to address this problem, to make things a little safer. And so at great personal expense and risk to my qualification chances, I finally put my MIT degree to use. Through alterations to my sled, slight alterations to my helmet, and then drastic shifting in my position on the sled and the weights inside of it, I implemented a system where an athlete could slide with the impossibility of his helmet even touching the ice. Relearning to balance on this system was a challenge given my scoliosis. It threatened my qualification chances, but perhaps the proudest moment of my athletic career prior to the Olympic Games was that after a couple of months of sliding, where the helmet and sled were completely deemed legal in every race, I had realized that I had developed a system which worked. It not only worked, it worked incredibly well and could save the futures of my fellow athletes. At the Olympic Games a year ago, I was training above my rank. I believed I'd put in a great showing for Israel, probably catch the far more experienced Italian athlete in front of me, but putting in a performance that's worthy of the country that sent you is pretty much all we can ask for as athletes. And so for 10 days, 4 training sessions, I slid quite decently with this system, and it was given a thumbs up. Again, it was a legal system. But 20 minutes before the final training session, 16 hours before the Olympic competition, a 3-person jury panel informed me that my helmet was being disqualified. I was confused. The reasoning they gave lacked any consistency. It changed every time I cited to the rule book as to why what they were saying was incorrect, and I felt and believe it was truly unfair. Ultimately, though, there was nothing I can do. The effect was like trying to type on a brand new keyboard. You make mistakes, you lose your place. And so in the final day of training, I slipped to last place, losing a disastrous amount of time. Later that evening, I'd heard it was a fellow athlete who believed that if he knocked me out of the race, he could better his standing, who had gone to the jury with misleading claims about my helmet. And so initially, I felt this intense, white-hot anger, but it quickly gave way to something far worse. It is truly impossible to explain the abject, paralyzing fear of embarrassing one's country in the Olympic Games. It is something I've never experienced before, hopefully will never experience again. For hours into the evening, this fear gripped, it consumed me. It was all I could think about. Israel had accomplished something amazing. Israel had qualified for an Olympic berth in a sliding sport. No small feat, but I was about to embarrass Israel with a subpar, unworthy, embarrassing performance. Israel had sent me as its representative, and I was about to blow that opportunity to show what we could do in front of the world, in front of millions of people. For hours into the evening, I sat alone in a shipping container, a frigid, cold shipping container at the track, staring at the wall. I was supposed to be preparing my equipment in the shipping container for the competition 10 hours away. And so my brother, Alex, he called me. And he said, AJ, no matter what happens tomorrow, you're going to go out, you're going to compete, you're going to be an Olympian, so just go out and do your best. So for some people, that might have been true. Like, what difference did it make if I was 30th or 26th? But I yelled back at him. I did. I yelled through the phone. I said, you don't understand. It's not about that. I'm better than that. Israel is better than that. We're not last place. And at that moment, everything fell into place. I feared because I knew what I was capable of. Israel reached the games not because of a helmet, but because for 4 years its athlete took up to 3 times as many runs as other athletes per day, watched 8 to 10 hours of video per day, quit a 6-figure job and went broke, slept in cars in frigid temperatures, self-coached and self-funded. I ate, slept, and breathed representing Israel. And for that, Israel had accomplished something that was previously written off as unachievable. So the next day when I crossed the finish line, I was far off from gold. But the announcers were completely confused because I was pumping my arms very hard in elation. I was proud, I was happy, because I had put in a sliding performance that was actually worthy of the faith and trust that Israel had given me. I harnessed that fear. I didn't avoid it. I didn't ignore it. The critical life lesson, perhaps the most important and valuable lesson that I've learned in all of my years as an athlete, if not life, is that fear exists only in the presence of potential, never without the possibility of success. Put another way, fear is a barometer of potential, Fear is present only when you know, on some level, that you can overcome failure or loss. What I want to change, what I want to leave you with today, is to recognize that when you fear, particularly falling short, it is because you put yourself in a situation for which you could succeed. You fear missing a shot in a basketball game because you're in the game, because you can play. Perhaps you fear not getting a job because you're qualified enough to apply for the position. Maybe you fear not living a life of meaning, but that's only because you know that you can have a positive impact in the world. Everything we fear, we do so because we know we can succeed. The truth is, now that I think about it, there has never been a time in my life or career that I have feared a situation for which I could not have succeeded. And so it truly is in life. When fear is present, potential exists. When failure is feared, it is only because it can be overcome. So next time you fear falling short, don't try to conquer the fear. Don't ignore it. Don't avoid it. Just shift your perspective and harness it, because fear is truly a measure of potential. Thank you very much for having me today. I look forward to all of your own successes.